you all back to 3 Psych Docs. I'm Dr. Evelyn Burrell. There's a lot going on today. There's a lot going on in this world over these last few weeks, these few months, these few years, these few generations. And right now, the underlying upset and hurt and pain has really, I think, just overwhelmed us as not only a nation, but as a world. And so we wanted to take some time today to talk about what's going on, how we're doing, maybe check in a little bit with how everyone else is doing, our viewers. I know from my end, this has been a long week. It's been an exhausting week. It's been an upsetting few months and years, but particularly these last couple, maybe week and a half has felt particularly demanding. Today, Dr. Angela Kenzslowe and Dr. Michelle Melton and I are going to be speaking about some of these issues and how we're doing and how we're responding to two pandemics, between COVID-19 continuing and an increase in positive coronavirus cases here in Arizona, alongside rioting and looting and protests. Dr. Melton, how are you doing?
I'm going to start with the affirmation, because this is a practice that I started last week when I just have felt overwhelmed. I felt many things that are coming to the surface, and I'm just trying to process through and explore a bit more. But the affirmation is, today, I give myself permission to feel depleted. And that is an experience that I've come to more days than not in this past week. And so I feel depleted right now. I know I will rebound. I know that I will be rejuvenated. But in this moment, I give myself permission to feel depleted, because I am.
Yeah. I absolutely understand what you're saying. I haven't been doing the same thing with giving an affirmation, but I've found myself having to compartmentalize. And then when I'm able to just open up, I'm fatigued, I'm emotionally spent, I'm drained. I'm trying to do what I can to hold space for other people, and have to definitely remember that I cannot pour from an empty cup. And so I have to do things for my own self-care to make sure that I'm okay. And some of those things is sometimes I just have to turn the news off. I have to get off of social media. Be mindful of the conversations I'm having.
And with whom?
Yeah, and
with whom?
I've been really thoughtful about who I'm giving my energy to. At this point, some people are really just kind of taking. I feel like some people are just kind of taking my energy. And I really am also working to bring people in my life who are just adding, to myself and to my energy and to what my needs are.
Yeah, it's in that Dr. Burrell has been wonderful. I have received so many text messages, so many messages on my inbox on Facebook. How are you?
Yeah.
Are you okay? What do you need? And for that, I am so grateful. I'm so thankful.
I completely agree. The amount of positive interaction and just the people reaching out, people of mostly, white individuals or, people of other minority populations have reached out, just overwhelmingly positive support and love and care. And then you take that, that experience of, oh my goodness, these people really love me and my family, and they're working to educate themselves, and they're reading and they're saying, I'm doing this. I'm not expecting you to teach me. I'm going to go and I'm going to learn. And, I'm sorry I didn't do this earlier. And that mixed in with sorrow of loss has been so, it's been I don't even really have a word for it at this point. It's just been different.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Melton.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to share that I've had similar experience of friends and some associates reaching out and saying, I don't know what to say, but I just want you to know that I'm here. If you need me, how can I support? So I appreciate that. But what has been more, I I don't know if healing is, I will use the word healing, is that I live downtown Phoenix. And so for every night since last week, Friday, or 2 Fridays ago now, there has been some march, some demonstration.
Mm-hmm.
And to see crowds of people coming and chanting Black Lives Matter still resonates with me now. I didn't realize how much I had begun to be affected by the rhetoric that we don't, that my life does not, that to hear these crowds of people, this chorus of voices saying Black Lives Matter, touched deeply in ways that I didn't know I needed to hear. Right? So more than just being on the TV, but seeing outside my window, it was like a message to me, and I needed that this week. So more than just the individual messages from people that I know personally, but hearing that and seeing that is meaningful for me.
Wow, what a great gift.
Yeah.
Great gift.
It's a gift that I think many of us maybe didn't even know we were asking for to this degree. I took my children to protests, and I was very hesitant considering COVID-19. So we went, masked out, and I was asked, someone at the march asked me why I brought my children. And, and I said, because they have to know, they're going to get so many messages from people who tell them that their lives don't matter. And I need them to see the thousands of people here right now saying that it does. And I need it to resonate with them. And I need to be able to remind them of this moment of, remember when we went and we walked and we marched and we yelled and we kneeled and we demanded, but everyone was there: Black, white, Latino, Indigenous peoples, LGBT, the entire group in the coming together was there to yell it out and to be heard. And I really needed my children, wanted my children to know that as they grow up, that their lives absolutely do matter, and that there's people taking it to the streets to let them know that.
Mm-hmm.
What did they say afterward? What was that car ride home like?
It was unfortunate. It was powerful in the sense that my children said, like, wow, all those people were there, right? But they were also exhausted. So the walk was hard. But something my daughter said is still sitting with me. And to be honest, I'm not sure how to respond to it. She said, I just don't understand why white people don't like us. And I said, white people do like you, but white people love you. You have white aunties, and uncles and cousins, and they love you and they adore you. And some people just don't know how, don't know how to ultimately and unequivocally love you every day, all the time, without the but.
Yeah.
And that's a hard conversation to have with a 6-year-old who experiences racism often, but doesn't realize that they experience racism often. They don't catch the microaggressions that maybe me and their father might. And so it's a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
That's hard. I had my son and his family over yesterday, and trying not to have a lot of conversation around the kids because I don't know what they've been exposed to. I know that because of COVID, they've been staying home and indoors, and I don't know how much news they're exposed to. So I was very mindful of that conversation around my grandchildren. But I know that my son is looking at, how do we live self-sustaining? They just planted a garden in their backyard. They're looking at, how do we buy more land so we can have our own animals? And so I know that conversation isn't unique. I know there's others who are saying, okay, these things that have been happening for 401 years, right? It's come to a head. I think COVID, us being indoors, people being unemployed, and then minority people being unemployed through COVID, right? Or being in those essential jobs of the lower end jobs and being more exposed to COVID. And so I think that this has been a perfect storm. And with that, then a lot of conversations are happening on, well, how do I ensure that right now, if the system doesn't change quick enough, how do I protect who's dear to me? And I think that's why those conversations of how do I have land? How do I have self-sustaining food?
Protection, self-protection.
Yeah. Well, I have a CCW. I have,
yeah.
My home is very well protected.
As it should be.
As it should be. And I think that people have to get around the narrative too. I know I've spoken with Black men who have been so anti-gun because of the stereotype of what that means. Oh, I'm a Black man with a gun, so that means I have to be a thug, because that's what the media tells us. That's what movies tell us. That's what TV tells us, right? And so we have to change that narrative of, no, the NRA is a very large organization that you don't have to join, but you can bear arms depending on the state that you're in. You know, you get your CCW, or Arizona, we're a constitutional carry, to protect yourself.
Yeah, and we have every right to.
Yeah, but then the question is, why do we have to?
There it is.
Why is the thought when you made that when you offered that question, I became uneasy in that moment. I wish we didn't feel like we needed to protect ourselves.
And then you have people who, white nationalists, I'm not going to say people who, you have white nationalists who have been prepping and preparing. And, you know, my question, are we going to civil war? Is this going to be a race riot? Is it, you know, is it something that now, because there's so many people who are hearing and rallying around Black Lives Matter, that this systemic change is going to catapult forward? You know, there's all these questions about what does the future look like? Should I be stockpiling on food, or are we good? Like, you know, because COVID, is there going to be a resurgence after all the protests? Like, what does our future look like with everything that's going on? You know, I've been happy about conversations that I've had where people have said, you know what, I've been the person who said all lives matter. And now I get it, why I need to say Black Lives Matter. That makes sense.
You know, what you just shared brings you back to a conversation we had before about creating a new normal, right? And that being a counter to any fears and worries about what's going to happen in the future, because that is absolutely, you know, an experience of, I don't know what's going to happen. People are saying X, Y, and Z. Should I be doing this ABC? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? And I think to come back to, again, combating some of that worry, some of that angst and discomfort about what may be, is what are you doing now? What is the new normal that you're envisioning? And for me, a part of that has been reflecting on kind of the larger issue around white supremacy, and how do I, in myself, in my circle, in my work, how do I decolonize, right? How do I, you know, root out the pieces that are not part of who I want to be or what I want my future to look like. And to me, that's a part of protection, and connects to how do I sustain and then move forward and thrive. So the pieces of decolonizing old belief systems and internalized racism, and beginning to challenge those pieces that have been so part of a structurally violent society, then I'm like, I don't want that part anymore. So what am I going to do next? I don't have the answers to all that, but just the question
No
is
idea.
what I need to start
My question on, can you give an example of what someone who's watching this, what, like just one action step of what can I do to work towards decolonizing myself?
Mm-hmm. Again, I always come back to, and this just might be because of my training, I come back to the self-reflection piece. I come back to the awareness piece and have an intentional practice around what am I sitting with and what am I doing with it? Where did this come from, so to speak? Because what did Maya Angelou say? That which is denied cannot be healed. And that means starting with myself. I'm not taking a critical view of what role I have, what identities of privilege and what identities of oppression I carry, then I'm going to be not useless, but not as effective. Because if I want to create change, to me, that's a sense of activism. And any part of activism, in my opinion, has to be connected to a larger collective. Like this is not just a flash in the pan moment, right? Where emotions are high and we're just discharging some of that. But what am I connecting to here? For me, it is that decolonization. And I'm starting with the work that I do, decolonizing therapy. And what does that look like? And that starts with me and acknowledging the pieces of my traditional training that can perpetuate white supremacy.
Absolutely. I'm 100 with you, Dr. Melton. I have been challenging and looking at the training for us as psychologists, and some of the questions that I've received recently has a lot to do with, well, how do we talk about race, and how do, what if I have someone who comes into my office who I fundamentally disagree with, when we're talking about race, I'm not supposed to input my beliefs onto my clients. And so how do I have those conversations? And, and I've really been reflective on that. And I sit back and I think, man, as psychologists, we're supposed to be able to talk about everything: sex, religion, gender, sexual orientation,
drugs and rock and roll.
Drugs, we're supposed to be able to sit and have all of these conversations in a way that's thought-provoking and effective, and we're supposed to be able to confront, like the narrative of the people that are sitting in front of us. But then when race comes in, we sit and we say, oh, I don't want them to be upset, and I don't want to say the wrong thing, and so I'm just going to say nothing. And so that I say all that to say that I've actually also reflected on how do we train and learn how to talk about race? People of color, we talk about race. I talk about race all the time. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, happy hours, we talk about race. I don't talk about it with my white friends so much.
One of the things that I did as psychologists, we go through practicums, right? Where we work like our clinical training when we're in school and we're a student. And the first practicum that I had was at a community mental health organization. And part of my informed consent is I would give my identity, saying, I'm what my sexual orientation is, what my race is, right? And I would then say what they have told me they identify as, and how do you see our working together? And that started the conversation, and it started the conversation without me putting my beliefs on them, but it took the elephant out of the room, right? So I'm working with a woman who is a 60-year-old white lesbian, and that's not who I am, and I say how I identify. We get to have that conversation initially, and I think it helps to create rapport. And so then what happens later, if session 3, session 4, something comes up, I now have absolute permission to do, whether it's motivational interviewing, so it's still not me putting my beliefs, but what makes you, those open-ended questions. So I think if we, as the two of you are talking about, if we retrain our thinking and just put it out there, session 1, informed consent. This is who I am. This is how I show up, because we're always talking about, are we a good fit, right? So is who I am a good fit for who you are? And then if later we're like, I don't know if that's a good fit, we can bring it up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's that part of being able to be
Alice
fully
part.
yourself.
Yeah.
You know, when you are in whatever role that you're in, and that means challenging pieces of white supremacy that have not allowed for people of color, particularly Black people, to be their full selves unless it is made in a particular image that is similar to or assimilated into what is acceptable. And for me, that's where that decolonization kind of reflection is coming from. How am I allowing myself to be fully present? And that shifts at times, because sometimes the environment, using some DBT language, sometimes the environment is too powerful and it's not safe. And giving myself permission to not engage in certain ways. And that is still honoring myself, right? There's a shifting that happens that's not necessarily in the protection of other people to maintain, you know, these old ideologies, right? But more of how do I allow myself to be fully present in a way that is authentic and grounded and centered for me. Because not everybody deserves to have my story or my voice. And I get to decide that. And that's actually one of the other pieces I've been reflecting on this week, where there have been calls for me to, you know, facilitate town hall meetings for universities, for other kind of larger public Zoom meetings. My question is, to what end? Like, tell me about your program. Like, how do you see this fitting in your commitment to the longevity of honoring diversity and inclusion? Is this going to be a conversation about how to have a conversation that's difficult? Or are we actually going to have the difficult conversation?
Exactly.
I'm no longer interested in teaching people how to create a shared language around talking about racism. I want the people in the room to be able to have the conversation and not try to shift into this position of I'm the facilitator and I got to figure out how to hold the space. No, just be in the space. Let's just be in the space for a minute. And so that's some of the other things that have been coming up this week of, for me, of I'm not trying to have my story satisfy curiosity, where I have seen and heard some of my white allies, white counterparts, expressing sadness about why this is happening. And for me, the sadness isn't the first reaction, is anger, right? And so the sadness to me is more about their projection. Like, it is sad, but at this point, anger fits the facts because rights are being violated.
Right.
I want to use that energy to address that, as opposed to, oh my gosh, what's happening?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you say that, my thoughts went a little different just with the last statement that you said about rights are being violated. And I saw that there was a white lady who her intention was fabulous, her intention. And she had 2 white sons, and she gives this long narrative to white people. So doing what we've asked allies to do, right? White people talk to white people and have those conversations and help them to understand. And on the picture of herself and her 2 white sons, it beautifully done, put Black Lives Matter, right? And I start reading the narrative. And at first I'm like, oh, wow, she gets it. This is great. And I'm reading, and what she's telling the other white mothers to do is imagine if it were your son. And it's over and over again. Imagine if it was your son, right? Talking about George Floyd specifically. Imagine if it was your son who you saw on the news with the police with their knee on his. Imagine if it was your son. Imagine if it was. And I'm like, why do we have to imagine if it's your son for you to have outrage over the murder of a person who shouldn't have been murdered? Why do we have to imagine to have compassion? Why do I have to imagine that it's someone who's close to me for it to matter? And that's why we say we, Black lives don't matter, is because for them to matter, we have to imagine that it's someone who matters to me.
Right, that looks white.
Yeah, that is a white life.
That is a white life.
Right, when we see the animal cruelty commercials on TV, people cry, right?
I
They're
do.
not imagining their puppy. They're not like, oh, what if that was my puppy? No, you cry for those puppies.
That's right there, yeah.
That's right there. And all puppies who could be in that position. You know, and I think because, and again, I've just really been trying to process all week, why are we okay with seeing especially Black men being killed, and why are we so immune to this? Well, there's so many movies about slavery, right? We're used to seeing Black men beat and tormented. We're used to seeing Black men in chains and with the chain, the metal collar, and then the wire things. Like, these are images that are so ingrained because we see them in our history books, we see them in our movies, right? We see them in the news. This is what the history of the US has been. And so we're immune, right? But I shouldn't have to imagine my white son for it to
I would go even further than being immune. It is what we are conditioned to believe as appropriate and right and acceptable, right? So this is the norm. Yeah. You know, and it's the dehumanizing aspect of it that has been around and reinforced and institutionalized. I read recently a state senator, I want to say, I forget exactly where, but Globe, Arizona, had like a 46-minute video talking about George Floyd and how he, you know, should not be praised as a hero and all these different things. And when I was reading the article and seeing the people that came out in opposition of his statements, it really, what they were opposing is that basically in this kind of bringing up his history, he's been arrested, you know, in prison, all these different, so on and so forth. It's like you are dehumanizing this individual to make it almost okay that he was supposed to be treated less, without the dignity of his breath, without the dignity of his life. Like, if there was something going on, people still get to be treated with dignity, unless, right, it's part of this old ideology and narrative that Black people don't get to be.
Yeah, it's the opposite of what they teach negotiators in positions, or even people who, if you're going to be a victim of a crime, right? See my face. Hi, my name is Angela. I have a son. I have grandchildren. I have a family, right? To humanize who I am, right? Yeah. Same thing with the negotiators. Hey, you person with your gun pointed at everybody. I'm officer so-and-so, and my name is, and da-da-da-da. And so they're doing the opposite.
Yep.
Right? It's that same psychology, but it's now dehumanized, where we're taught to humanize to be seen. So I don't want to see you.
It's, you know, I speaking, going back to what you were saying, Dr. Melton, I have sat with that a lot and argued, you know, that piece when it comes to dehumanizing, you know, Black people and other, you know, people of color, and acting as though our existence doesn't matter. And when we talk about, you know, seeing the you know, an animal on TV being hurt and being upset by that, and people saying that they can watch a man be murdered and maybe kind of shrug their shoulders, I have the hardest time, I think, really sitting and saying, how in the world are you okay with that? And then white people coming back and saying, well, I don't know what makes George Floyd's death so different and why I'm so upset by that one. And I didn't know that this was a problem. No, we're not doing that here. We've known. It's always been a problem. It's rooted in our history, and there's no way to be that avoidant of the information that's offered. There's just no additional narrative in that scene that people saw. There was no justification. And what we've seen time and time again is the minimization and justifying these heinous acts. Well, why was he in that neighborhood? And why would he have that hoodie over his head? And why was he playing with that toy gun? And, you know, why didn't they just comply? And when those two white men rolled up on him, how come he just didn't say who he was? Like, we don't have to do any of these things. It's not okay to just take someone's life. Like this, we're talking about someone's physical existence on this planet.
Right.
We're talking about, these are individuals who no longer physically exist on this earth, in this universe. And that being removed from the narrative of, oh, okay, well, he's dead and this is really upsetting and I feel really sad. This is more than just, he passed away and I feel sad. This is a person who will not father their daughter.
Right.
This is someone who may never have children. This is someone who didn't get the chance to finish their education. This is someone who never had an opportunity to be married, or maybe to travel, or to finish whatever goals it is that they had for themselves. It was taken from them. It was stolen from them, and their existence is no more in the physical form. And that is the loss, generationally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. The loss is so much more than what I hear in the narrative. And I sit back and I say, this person does not exist in the physical form anymore, and they never will again. Their life was stolen from them. Their life was taken. And there's another person that's buried. And it's more than I feel so bad and I feel so guilty and I'm so sorry that this happened. This is looking at what's going on. How many Black lives never even had an opportunity to exist because a greater systemic issue decided that they didn't have that they weren't human enough to exist. How many Black people will we never know, will we never meet, will we never see, will we never interact with because their generation and their name was removed from this earth and from this world. How can we sit with that as a people and say that it doesn't matter? How do we not look at it as being for what it really is a genocide of hundreds and hundreds of years of genocide, of slowly killing and taking away from our people and from our family and from this earth, and the things that as people of color we could really offer and that we have offered and that we've attempted to offer that we haven't been allowed to move forward with.
Yeah, that's very powerful. What do we then say? I'm going to bring in some of the arguments that we hear, right?
I was just about to as well.
Yeah, that oppose what you're saying. So how do we answer the people who say, well, the abortions are the highest in the Black community? And I don't know those stats, so I can't say that that's true, but that's an argument that people are saying.
Or what about Black on Black crime?
Right.
Those lives don't matter.
Or more white men have been killed by cops than Black men. So I'm going to address first more white men being killed by cops than Black men. There's a difference between someone who is involved in a firefight or where the officer was actually in danger and the officer protecting themselves, and then there is loss of life. Compared to this is a person who is not doing anything other than being Black to put you in danger, right? Black skin has been weaponized. So that is the perceived danger. The Black men that we're talking about were not pointing guns at officers. They were not pointing knives at officers. They were not throwing grenades at officers. They were not planting bombs to kill officers and other innocent people. These were people jogging. That wasn't an officer, but these are people jogging. These are people walking. These are people being stopped being pulled over, saying, hey, I am a carrier. I do have a weapon. I have a CCW. These are people who were doing lawful things and were needlessly and innocently killed.
And even just speaking to the disproportionate factors of Black people make up 13% of this nation. And if we're being killed at these rates, more so than 13%, then it's disproportionate.
Yeah. You know, that kind of ties into this argument or this talking point that's thrown out of what about Black on Black crime? And I have such a visceral reaction when I hear that. One, because that is a white supremacist narrative.
Right, we don't hear about white on white crime.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't hear about Mexican on Mexican crime.
Right. And what's dangerous about that is there's this old saying in statistics that statistics don't lie, but statisticians do. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take some, data and then spin it and put it in a narrative in such a way and you run with it, then that becomes the facts when it's somebody else's interpretation. So when you look at the statistics around quote unquote black on black crime, what is not also said is that crime occurs in proximity, right? So if you go to white neighborhoods, predominantly white neighborhoods, you will have similar rates of crime of what do they call it? The perps being white and the victims being white, but we don't hear those statistics. Those aren't talked about. That hadn't got a fancy term of white on white crime.
Right, it's just crime.
Because it's not part, right, it's just crime because it's not part of a white supremacist narrative for controlling, non-white peoples. And so every time I hear that black on black crime, yes, crime is a problem. But those statistics that you're talking about are not because people are black. People are not experiencing those crimes just because of the color of their skin.
And we're still highly segregated.
Yep.
We still, especially in Arizona, you can drive through particular neighborhoods and know racially kind of how it's segregated. And throughout the nation, if you've traveled, kind of where Black folks live, where the Latinos are at, where some of the Asian communities are. So we're not in a place where we've really integrated, which allows for this narrative, the racism and those narratives to continue. I don't even know any Black people. I've never had to know any Black people. I live in a majority white area. So those Black people over there kill each other. We don't, and that doesn't allow so easily to counter kind of those conversations where you're saying, wait a minute, just because you don't live with Black people and that you don't know Black people doesn't mean that Black people are dangerous. Doesn't mean that we're going to come and hurt you or just killing each other rapid.
Or even acknowledging that they are dangerous. Like their neighborhoods have crime in them. Right. Like.
wait, but I just had a thought. Here's the difference. So you go to New York or you go to Chicago and you talk about the mob. They kill each other. But instead of it being, it's Black on Black crime, we romanticize the mob, the Italian mafia, right? That's romanticized. We have wonderful movies that are classics that people enjoy. Tell me about the right? I mean, it just hit me like the narrative of killing your own people when it's people who are white, we romanticize it.
I was watching.
For Black, it's horrid.
Yeah, I was watching Malcolm X yesterday, and the Denzel Washington movie, and I haven't seen it in years. I haven't seen it in a long time, and so I was like, let me see what Denzel's up to.
I lived in Korea and watched it bootleg when it came out in Korea.
That was in like the 90s. Yeah. So I sat and I watched it, and what kind of burned in my memory again, because this I think was the most memorable piece when I was younger, when I was a child and saw it, and it started resonating with me again, was when he looked up the definition of Black and white in the dictionary. And even just in the most basic of form, what we learn about ourselves as Black people and what white people learn as themselves as white people, and what that ongoing kind of narrative and process of being pure and untouched and unblemished versus dark and and scary and evil, and starting to remove those things from our narrative, that being Black is the most amazing thing in the world. I'm like, I love being Black. I love being a Black woman. I never would want to do or be anything else in this world. And I am so glad that I have Black, beautiful children, their skin glows and glistens and their hair is curled and it's tight and it's beautiful. And I think that, and it's so amazing and so promising to me to be able to be a Black woman today and to raise, Black children. And I really hope that, and I want that narrative of Blackness to continue about how beautiful and how amazing we are. Because if you look at us through history, that's all we've ever been. Is beautiful and amazing and unique and smart and strong and powerful, and taking that back. Angela, did you grab a dictionary?
Yeah, but I grabbed my Spanish English dictionary.
I don't have a dictionary on me.
Right.
Yeah.
I like look it up online.
Yeah, I was like, I can Google it real quick.
I was trying. But instead,
Google
it
has
actually,
everything.
when I looked up Black, it actually was really cool. It went through different things that can be Black, and then gave how to say it in Spanish. So
I just pulled up Black in Webster's dictionary. Destitute of light or incapable of reflecting it, of the color of soot or coal, of the darkest or very dark color, the opposite of white, characterized by such a color as black cloth, black hair, or eyes. Enveloped or shrouded in darkness, very dark or gloomy, dismal, gloomy, or forbidding, wicked, cruel, mournful, horrible, menace, expressing discontent. So that's still there. Let's look at white.
Yeah. Did it also say I have the sources? And it even says in here, black as hell.
Black as hell. So white. White with fear. Where is it at? Having the color of pure snow, the opposite of black or dark. A white skin. White as thy fame and as thy honor clear. Free from spot or blemish or from guilt or pollution. Innocent, pure, the color of purity. So really, the definitions haven't changed in Webster's dictionary since Malcolm X. And I imagine.
I think that really underscores how powerful words are.
Yeah.
Right. And once we begin to use certain words to describe experience or internalize, the meaning of certain words, this is again where the decolonization happens, right? And kind of breaking down, what am I saying to myself about myself? What language am I using to describe myself? And really, how does that then shape my understanding of self in relationship, right? Relationship to, close others, relationship to the world and my role. And this is where I believe that empowerment practices are so important, where we can, as in members of the Black community, can strengthen our understanding of ourselves and our own identities, and being able to, again, be that centered, grounded, this is who I know myself to be. Because you'll get many messages from the world that are inconsistent with that. But what are you going to come back to as your core?
Yeah. So let's take a moment and each of us just kind of go through what some of our takeaways have been from our discussion today and start to wrap up. Dr. Kenzslowe, would you like to start?
I'm still thinking.
I can go first this time.
Okay.
Today will be the first day where I'm going to do this thing called the Sunday setup, of kind of setting up what I want my week to look like. So setting intentions or particular practices or activities or coping things. And for me this week will be drawing from the strength and the words of my ancestors, right? And so I found a poem, one of my favorite poems by Maya Angelou, called Our Grandmothers. And the last stanza is so, it just gives me chills when I think about it, when I put myself in this language and remember this is who my grandmother was and how she moved in the world. And that's a part of me that's in me, that's the core of me that I could always come back to and tap into. So I'm just going to read this part, these words that I will take with me through this week. So it goes, centered on the world stage, she sings to her loves and beloveds, to her foes and detractors. However I am perceived and deceived, however my ignorance and conceits, lay aside your fears that I will be undone, for I shall not be moved. That's what I'm taking with me into this week. Whoever is for me or against me, Be not afraid, for I shall not be moved or undone.
Love that.
There's something that I shared on my personal social media, and this comes from a very vulnerable space. You know, I was raised by my mother, who's white. My father died, gosh, I had just turned 5 and he died. And so I'm raised in a neighborhood, well, we moved a lot, but in neighborhoods, other than when we lived in Inglewood in the 5th grade, and then we lived in Inglewood for the very beginning of my 7th grade. In the middle, 6th grade, I moved to Las Vegas, and they were busing kids in Las Vegas to integrate, and I was bused, but those of us who were bused to the Black neighborhood. So I was on the bus, being bused to the Black neighborhood. And so I was raised by my white mother. There was not a lot of Black history taught in our home, you know, 70s, 80s. In my school, in the high school that I went to out here in Arizona, I'm from California, I did the majority of high school in California, but I hadn't taken history yet. So I took history when I moved to Arizona. And literally in our history book, it was, if this were the whole page, it was just a paragraph that took up a quarter of the page. That was the Black history. And we had a teacher who came in on the weekend and created these stations where we could learn, right? So at least he was trying to make up somehow for this book that did nothing. And recently, I've been compiling information of what allies can do to take in information, to not have to ask Black people to help them learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm finding that a lot of that information that I'm asking allies, I don't even know. And so I'm going to be ordering books and watching different movies because I can't ask someone to do something that I haven't done. When people look at me, I've lived a Black experience systemically, right? I don't walk around here saying I'm white. I do identify as biracial, and I recognize that I do have some privilege, not white privilege, but I do realize that in the Black community, there is some privilege with colorism and all that, and that's a whole other issue. And I'm very aware of it. And so I try to do my best to, you know, I can't think of the word, mitigate that. But there's some things that I still have not experienced that Black people with darker skin than mine do experience. You know, the last time we talked, I don't have a problem going to Scottsdale. I don't feel any discomfort going to environments that are here within the city. My discomfort comes going into rural areas until I've been there for a while. Like I can go to Prescott and I'm totally comfortable in Prescott, Arizona. I am now totally comfortable in Bullhead City, Arizona. Going through Kingman, I'm a little like, because I haven't really been there, right? But once I'm there and I see the space, then I become comfortable. Wickenburg, I don't know. A girlfriend.
My niece just drove through Wickenburg. She came to visit from Vegas, and on her way back, she said, "I'm going to just drive straight through." I said, "Yeah."
I went to Essence Fest a couple of years ago, and I flew into Atlanta. And my girlfriend and I, we rode a bus, like a party bus, and then we decided that the party bus was really for young people. So we rented a car and we drove back. And we were driving back through these towns from New Orleans to Atlanta that I'd been to Gulfport, Mississippi once by myself. But going through these little rural towns, I'm like, okay, we got to make sure that the sun doesn't go down. But that was my first experience really with that, except for once in 2001 where I went to Huntsville and Mississippi by myself. And that was my first time ever really in the South. And I was fearful then, but still I had privilege, right? So it's a lot to process. It's a lot of identifying where I fit in all of this. You know, my son last night, he was here. They were talking about going to the dog park. They were leaving here at 7:30, and I'm like, you have to be home by 8. And he's like, Mom, I'm good. I'm like, you are Black with a big old afro and you're going to be at the dog park? Text me as soon as you get in. He says, okay, he didn't. This morning, he finally texted me and was like, yeah, we made it in. So I have these fears, these personal fears for my own son and my family and the people whom I love. But I also have to do similar work that some white people have to do.
Yeah.
Powerful.
I think I'm kind of in between both of you. You know, I watched yesterday Michelle Obama's documentary on Becoming. I haven't read the book yet. Unfortunately, I don't have much book reading time these days, but and then I watched Malcolm X, and I think, and today, you know, I decided that I was going to watch, I was actually just going to, it's Sunday. We're recording this on a Sunday, sorry. But, you know, I'm just going to sit and I'm going to binge watch uplifting, educational Black movies and reread some books that I read, you know, maybe in undergrad several years ago, but you know, I have all these books in my library that I haven't touched. You know, they followed me around and I've held on to them and I hold them really dear, but I haven't touched them in 10 or 15 years. So pulling those back out, you know, adding them back to my circulation, rereading, re-experiencing, and spending time reminding myself that, you know, the Black narrative and the Black history, American history, is more than slavery.
Yeah.
It's, you know, we have a history of coming together. We have a history of fighting. We have a history of pain and hurt, but we have a history of incredibly powerful love and support. So just really sitting in the power and the love of being Black in America and taking time to join that and regroup in some of those positive and amazing and supportive Black experiences that often get lost. So that's my plan. That's my takeaway. So I want to thank you guys. Today was a little different.
Yeah.
Thanks for being vulnerable, and it's kind of nice to be able to have open dialogue and conversation without teaching every now and then.
Yeah. It honors our humanity, right?
Say it again, Dr. Melton.
Said it honors our humanity. We don't have to be the teachers or the facilitators. We can just be real.
Yep. Absolutely.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.